Welcome back to JL Smith. I'm Jeff Smith. In this video, I'll be explaining the importance and purpose of the flute head joint cork. I'll also be showing you how to check a cork for sealing and proper positioning. But first, let's get to know the parts of the crown and cork assembly. This is the head joint disassembled, and this is the crown and cork assembly. The crown is visible at the end of the head joint when it's assembled. The looks of the crown is considered a signature of the maker. This assembly is referred to as the Cork Carrier. It's comprised of the cork, a top plate, and a bottom plate which is brazed to a threaded stud. The cork has a center hole which fits over the stud, and it's held secure by the top plate which is threaded into place. The crown comes after the head cork is assembled into the instrument. Now, I find that the head cork is often misunderstood. The primary purpose of the head cork is to seal the end of the flute. The degree of seal affects the pitch, response, and tone. And as with all woodwinds, a leak at the top of the flute affects every note. Every note will be leaking, and tone, pitch, and response will suffer because of it. There are other things the head joint cork can affect too, one of which is intonation. As you can imagine, when you move this in and out slightly, it affects the intonation or the distance between the notes. Some people call this a tuning cork, but tuning and intonation are two different things. Tuning's the overall pitch of the flute is related to other instruments or an orchestra or band. Tuning is done at the tenon of the head joint. Moving your head joint in or out makes it sharper or flatter to the orchestra or band or the piano you're playing with. Intonation, though, is the relationship of one note to the next or from one register to another. Once you have the instrument in tune, whether it's set to other instruments or an electronic tuner, you can make some micro adjustments to the head cork which will affect the intonation from one register to the next. It's important to know that the musician has more effect on intonation than the head cork alone. But it's still good to set this in an area that's going to give you good response and intonation. It's usually adjusted from the factory at a pretty good starting point. We normally set them where the factory does, except at the musician's request. As you adjust the head cork slightly, you'll also find the response of the instrument may change. This can be very subtle, but it's good to know that tone and response are affected by head cork placement. Now let's go to the bench and learn how to test the head cork for proper positioning and sealing. In checking it for sealing, the first thing I do is a suction test on the head joint, and I clean it off with a little isopropyl alcohol. Put my thumb over the embouchure hole and suck on the head joint. This one has nice suction to it, so I know the head cork is sealing. I'm not sure it's in the right position, but it is sealing. Not as much suction on this one, so I may have a problem there. This one, nothing at all. There's no suction whatsoever. I wonder if there's a cork in here. We'll check that in a minute. The next part is checking it for position, and you could do this in a couple of ways. First of all, check to see if the cork moves freely. We really don't want it to, but sometimes they do, and that's also an indicator that it may not be sealing, or it may be sealing in the position it's in, but it might be in the wrong position. When you put it in the right position, it may be leaking. So I usually check these and just see how freely it moves. This one, if I was able to press on my thumb on the crown and move the head cork. If I could use that little pressure to move the head cork, it's either in the wrong position or the cork is too small and it's not sealing. And this one, the crown will spin and spin forever because the cork is not holding itself securely in there to let me tighten the crown. So that's a test you also want to do, is see how easily it can be moved. We've checked the suction. Now let's check the kind of the fine adjustment of the position. And most of us will immediately go to our flute cleaning rod, which has, you know, an indicator at the end. By the way, these are often called tuning rods, which I think is incorrect because there's nothing you could do with this to tune your flute. It's all we have here is an indicator of where that head cork might go. But be careful with these rods because they vary quite a bit. Most of the makers manufacture their instruments so that the center of the embouchure hole to the bottom of the cork plate should be 17.1 to 17.3 millimeters. So how do we test that? Well, a lot of us rely on this as an indicator, but oftentimes these are wrong. In looking at these two rods here, you can see that they're very similar in manufacture. They even have some of the same little detail lines on them and so forth. Yet these marks are at totally different places. This one, I measured these before taking the video. This one is actually 17.3 millimeters. This one is 17.9. And I can't think of a flute where I'd want to use this as an indicator. So be careful about that. You might measure them, measure the one you have in your case if you have an opportunity. So be careful of that. I personally use in our shop a tool that we make, which is part of the flute head cork set, that has a mark that is exactly 17.3 millimeters back from the edge of the tool. And when I use that in the head joint here, I see that sure enough our indicator line on the tool mates up perfectly with the center of the embouchure hole. And I'll test that on a few head joints here. This one does not, but you can see I'm able to push that head cork easily into position. This is the one I was able to push loose with my thumb. This one, I could just keep pushing on that head joint forever, probably. So again, this is certainly going to have to be replaced. Now, if we don't know if it should be 17.1 or 17.3, and we're trying to do a critical setup of this flute head joint, then we might take the time to do a little further investigation, and we could measure the center of the embouchure hole with a couple different methods that I'll show you now. The first of which, and the easiest, is to use our head joint story stick. This stick has a series of little discs that we put on this end, and we insert it into the flute. And if we find that it starts to snug up at the center of the hole, which this one does, then we use this as an indicator of what the bore size is there. So this is actually a 17.3 millimeter disc. So I would set this head joint up so that the head cork is 17.3 millimeters back from the center of this hole. And again, I could do that with this tool here. All right. Now, if I didn't have a head joint story stick, I could measure with a caliper the tube, and I do that by first of all marking the imaginary center line of the embouchure hole, and then measuring the body at that area. So very carefully, I can measure the outside of the tube there, and this one measures 18.18 millimeters. Then I need to determine the wall thickness of the head joint. This one is 0.45 millimeters. Doubling that measurement, I would get 0.9 millimeters, and I would subtract that from the 18.8 millimeters I measured here to get my bore, my inside diameter, if you will, at that area. And that would be 17.28 millimeters, which is pretty close to 17.3. So I'm going to consider it 17.3 and set, again, this head cork 17.3 millimeters back from the center of the embouchure hole. I hope you've enjoyed learning about the importance and purpose of the head cork. If you've tested yours and find that it's failing, please have it serviced right away. If you want to learn about replacing the head cork, watch the next video in this series. To learn more about the tools we've used, such as the head joint story stick and the head joint cork set, visit us at jlsmithco.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you back here soon.